Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
Season 2, we are making progress in Season 2. We have reached Dave.
Dave, this is a weird episode, but we'll we'll get to that. We have more from our interview as well with Lost scholar Jason Mittell.
He's a scholar of television studies. He's not specifically a scholar of Lost, but we'll go with that anyway. I don't think he'd mind.
Let's do Dave. As always, on The Hatch, we start with our hottest of hot takes about the episode. Rosie, I feel like you've got a flaming hot take about Dave.
I was very, very satisfied by the scene where Hurley just tackles Sawyer and starts punching him.
That was also my hot take.
All of the nicknames that Sawyer's ever used for him, of which there's like a dozen. Like we know Sawyer's the nickname guy or something,
Yeah.
but to hear them all stacked up like that, I was like, man, he really deserves it. He's really quite the asshole. And he's been quite the asshole for the last couple of episodes. Since he came back from the other side of the island, has really leaned into that part of his character. But
He has upped the assholery. I agree.
Yeah, but really took it to the next level here, and I think got what he deserved.
I agree completely. I also wanted to bring that up as a hot take, and I'm glad that you did.
Great.
I think that the additional commentary that I would add about it is one that, once again, very gross, he is using his control of the medicine to poke into other people's medical issues.
Ugh, yeah.
Which is just so gross.
Yep.
And we saw this a couple weeks ago with Sun, and we talked about it. And two, my other favorite part of this scene, besides just watching Hurley pummel Sawyer, was watching Jin crack up the whole time. And Sun is like poking at him like, come on, go stop it. And Jin is just too busy laughing at it. And finally he's like, okay, fine, I'll go and break up this fight.
Right.
But he's still like laughing as he does it. That was awesome.
Because everybody kind of wants Sawyer to get beat up.
Yes, it's deserved.
So, fair enough.
One other quick hot take, and it's kind of dumb, but
That's fine.
The part at the beginning where Hurley and Libby are throwing out all the food by just opening the packets and dumping it onto the floor of the jungle.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so first of all, I think it's kind of gross that they're littering all that food in the jungle, which is probably not the biggest deal. But they have all of this, like, who knows how long they're going to be on the island and whether they're going to get food supplies again. And they have all of this fresh, food that they can store forever and eat, and they're just throwing it on the ground because Hurley's afraid he's going to eat it all. Like, come on. That's not cool. They need to save that food.
Well, they don't, because immediately thereafter another shipment of food arrives.
Right, but they don't know that.
Right. But also, I think from Hurley's perspective, it would be far more embarrassing for him to go to Jack or Locke and say, hey, remember when I gave away all the food? I didn't actually give away all the food.
This is true, but from a survival of the group perspective,
right.
Hurley should suffer the embarrassment and not potentially do something that could actually be very dangerous for them. Turns out not to be, because there's civilization on the island and pallet drops and all of these other things.
Right.
But at the moment, we don't know that. Anyway,
Fair enough.
That's my dumb hot take. Dave.
So, Dave.
Part of what stood out to me about this episode is, as weird as it is, but also like how dark it is when you really think about what's happening.
Yeah.
Like we find out that Hurley's back. We learn a lot of stuff we didn't know about Hurley's backstory here.
We do.
There was this accident where a deck collapsed and a bunch of people died, and he blames himself for that, and he was institutionalized, and he, imagined this person. We get all this, really dark stuff about his psyche that the psychologist or psychiatrist says you're eating to punish yourself, and Dave is like this manifestation of this part of himself that wants him to suffer and to continue to suffer. And then we get the bit on the island where Dave makes the speech like, come on, you think Libby would really be into you?
Yeah.
Like it goes to a very dark place.
And then Dave suggests, well, this is all a figment of your imagination.
Right.
Why don't you just jump off this cliff?
Right.
And snap out of it. And Hurley almost does.
I mean, I'm kind of interpreting that as a part of Hurley that has has almost a suicidal instinct.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong, or there's another way to see it, but it seemed to me that Dave is there to represent the part of Hurley that thinks that he would deserve to die or deserve to suffer in some way. At least that's
Well,
what I got out of the flashback.
That's an interesting point. Because Dave never frames it. When Dave has lines and he's speaking to Hurley, he never frames it as like, you're so bad and you deserve bad things.
No.
He frames it as, it's taco night. You know, don't you want to come have tacos? Like, don't you want to blow off this lame institution? Like, don't you want to get out of here? It's this narrative that says these people who are trying to help you are actually bad. And you're the one who's good. You're the one who can make the right decisions for yourself.
Right.
Come with me, you know, and of course he's the one putting those ideas, or Dave, the manifestation of whatever, is the one putting those ideas in Hurley's mind. But it's not like Dave is saying to Hurley, you're fat and that's bad.
No, I think he's saying to him, you're fat and that's good.
Right. Or that's fine.
Yeah, and
it's neutral.
Perhaps I'm reading too much into it, but I was thinking very much about the doctor's line, and I should say, like, I do not have a great understanding of mental illness or eating disorders, and you know, probably, I mean, I'm obviously, like, you know, I'm not like an expert on that subject, but I was just thinking about the doctor's line when he said to Hurley, you're eating to punish yourself. You know, it sort of seemed to me he was saying you think you don't deserve to change or get better because you caused this bad thing to happen. And so when I see Dave telling him, hey, it's taco night, go out and eat, you don't need to change, they're wrong. To me, you know, that seems like it could perhaps be a part of Hurley that thinks he doesn't deserve to get better. And just with on the island, like, we've seen that he thinks he's responsible for the crash because of the numbers, and because he's cursed. And so if, you know, I kind of see this as all like playing into that where when Dave is telling him, you know, you should jump, you'll snap out of it and be fine, that perhaps that's really a part of Hurley's psyche that thinks, you know, I deserve to fall off this cliff and die because I caused all of this to happen.
Well, and I think this is all in my head is not that big of a leap from I caused all of this to happen.
That's interesting.
Like when Dave is saying, you know, you're still in Santa Rosa, all these people are a figment of your imagination, like, the numbers are here, you know, you won the lottery, you know, all these things that are totally unexplainable and wild coincidences at best. It kind of, I can see why Hurley would accept, maybe I am imagining all of this.
Oh, interesting, because then he wouldn't be to blame for all of it.
Well, he would be to blame in the sense that he was the origin of all of it, because it's all stemming from his own mind.
Interesting. I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
There. Yeah,
like,
yeah.
He's not to blame in the sense that, like, he played the numbers in the lottery and that caused bad things to happen. But he's responsible in the sense that he's dreaming all of this up.
So he, like, brought into existence these people who are now suffering because of him. Right.
And I see why Hurley would buy that narrative.
That's really interesting.
You know what I mean?
No, I think there's something to that, because I think Dave represents, like, a fast and easy solution. Like, he doesn't have to do any hard work. He doesn't have to fix any of the things that are wrong with himself. He doesn't have to, you know, like, rescue people or help them. All he has to do is step off the edge of the cliff, and then it'll be okay. Out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course, Dave is the one who's trying to say, don't listen to the doctors, you know, and don't take these pills and don't stay in this place, which is probably objectively bad for Hurley's health, right?
I think we can agree that throughout this episode, Dave's advice is objectively bad.
Yeah. I mean, well, the thing that I struggle with, though, and maybe this is one thing that I wonder if it would be different if Lost were written today, is, like, the equation that fat equals bad. And that for Hurley to, quote-unquote, get better, he must lose this weight. And I feel like sort of the social conversation around weight has changed a lot in the last 15 years. Like,
for sure.
I don't know. I mean, I was sort of too young in season 2 of Lost to be paying much attention to that. But I wonder, that was something that was a little bit tough for me to kind of wrap my mind around. Like, is Dave saying to Hurley, or are the doctors saying to Hurley, like, fat equals bad? And is Libby saying that? Or and therefore is Dave saying, hey man, it's fine, actually a good thing? Or they, you know what I mean? Like that's the part of this episode that was kind of a mindfuck for me here in 2019. Because I could see a line of reasoning wherein Dave is actually good, because Dave is telling Hurley, there's nothing wrong with you.
I think that, so I agree with you that I think it would be, they would do it differently today, perhaps. But I think one of the complicating factors to just looking at it the opposite way as an equal and opposite point of view is that clearly Hurley's weight is like tied up in his mind with a lot of other things about himself that he doesn't like and wants to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that with the doctor, like asking him to find things about himself that he likes, and specifically is the way you look one of those, and he clearly doesn't. And
it's not just that he doesn't like the way he looks. Like, he feels like his weight was responsible for this terrible accident. Right. I can get why that's tied up in his mind with this is bad, and I wish I had not had all that weight. And we've seen in all the flashbacks where he works at Mr. Cluck's Chicken and eats the chicken constantly and sits at home on the couch, watching TV.
And his mom criticizes him, and
and so it's like, like we can
You're
definitely
right. This is
see
clearly an ongoing thing.
It's an ongoing thing, and he seems to have this strong association that when he's eating and eating, that's just who he is, and sort of stops him from accomplishing other things that he wants to be doing in his life. So I get the desire to change that.
I see that.
This is why neither of us are health professionals.
Correct.
Psychologists.
Libby, however, is a psychologist, and we should probably talk about her a bit.
God, Libby.
Yeah, her role in all of this.
What are your thoughts about Libby?
The final scene with Libby, where she finds him on the cliff and convinces him that this is real, I don't know if that scene worked for me. Like, having heard sort of Dave's pitch, which is, this is all a figment of your imagination, you're still in the hospital, etc., etc. I'm not sure I understand what made Hurley decide, or did Hurley decide that this is real, or did he just decide not to jump off the cliff? Like, I think there are two ways to read this scene, and one is Hurley accepts her reasoning and decides, okay, the island's real, I'm really here, X, Y, and Z. Or Hurley decides, okay, maybe this is all a dream, all a hallucination, whatever, but I think I'll stay in it.
Right, it's a dream, but at least it's a nice dream.
Right. And I don't know, because I remember after I saw this episode for the first time, thinking, oh, what if this really all is in Hurley's head? Like, that's a plausible explanation for the
I remember there was
series.
like a hot second when that was like the big theory in the fan community after this aired.
And I think this episode does leave that a little bit more open-ended than I remembered.
It does. I see what you're saying about that scene. There's, from a logic perspective, there's nothing she says that really conclusively counteracts the Dave theory. But I don't know. To me, I think what happens here is Hurley feels like, I think really she just convinces him, like, no, I'm real, and I'm really interested in you, and like there's something good about you. I don't know. To me, it's the emotion that he gets from Libby of like, no, you're a worthwhile person, and I see value in you, and I see it, so you should see it too. Like, I think that's what's happening here.
I hope
rather
so.
than like some conclusive explanation.
Right.
I think it's impossible to talk about this episode and what happens with Libby without acknowledging the final scene, where Libby is also in the mental institute, like creepily watching Hurley.
I never knew what to make of that scene.
No. I hate to say this, that scene does make me question a little bit what Libby's, true interest is in Hurley on the island. Like, obviously it's never played out. Libby dies in a couple weeks, and there's really no explanation ever given for what that scene was intended to mean. I assume the writers and creators just decided to move on and not go down that route. But it did leave me with kind of like a little bit of a sinking feeling in my stomach of, oh, what if Libby really isn't into Hurley and has some kind of like weird ulterior motive here? where she was, tracking him off the island for some reason and has some kind of plan or obsession. Or I don't know. It's strange.
So I didn't.
Am I being
feel
too
like...
cynical?
No, I don't think you are. And I feel like there's a version of this story where if Libby weren't killed in a couple of episodes, in season 4, she could have been revealed as a spy for Charles Widmore or whatever. Like, I think that's not cynical of you to think that that's
that could have been a cool
something
fucking story
that was being plotted along the way. But I just didn't feel like she was creepily watching Hurley. I got the feeling that she was a patient because she was a patient. Not that she was there with any ulterior motives, but that she was there receiving care herself. And that whether or not she recognized her, like, I don't think it was even clear that she recognized Hurley. Like, the way I read that was like, okay, they were institutionalized in the same place and at the same time, and that shows that they both have a history of mental illness, and maybe that's part of the reason they have a sort of understanding of each other. But I don't think it was clear that, because Hurley obviously didn't recognize Libby, and I don't even think it was clear that Libby recognized Hurley.
No, I think you're right. I think that's also a totally valid interpretation, and it's not clear at all that they're, that she's watching her, or that she remembers him. I mean, I like that interpretation better just because it's less dark and more hopeful. But I think I'm definitely, this is what Jason Mittell was saying about how we're interested in the story and also the storytelling. Like I really wonder what the writers were doing putting that scene there, and it's just an interesting road that they didn't go down, and I'm curious where it would have gone. I know there weren't a ton of subplots. I did enjoy, as always, the scenes with Ben this episode and the sort of Ben Locke dynamic that was. Well, first of all, I liked that like Saeed immediately just catches Ben in like a bunch more lies. Like after the big lie that he tried to maintain for 5 episodes, and now that that's broken down, like he just immediately tries lying again, and immediately Saeed's like just cutting him up right in front of him. But I also just the moment where Locke was kind of marveling like to Jack, like, gee, but like he really helped me. He didn't have to do that. I wonder why he did that. And I'm just thinking, Ben's magic is working on Locke here, and this is the beginning of a beautiful and tragic friendship.
This is why he did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seems like Locke is always willing to try to find the good in Ben and to see more in him than just the the lying supervillain type. And I think you start to see that here as well, where even when he knows that he's been pulling this huge trick on him, he's still like, but he tried to help me. Right.
And he's right. He didn't have to do that, but it does lead us to believe that he did that so that he could get Locke on his side, because he had to know the lie was not going to last forever.
Yeah.
And
and Locke is real smart. I mean, Locke asks the question of Ben this episode when he demands to be let into the hatch that we've been asking this whole time, which is, did you get caught on purpose?
Right.
Which is exactly the right question.
Right.
Anyway. So I think I'm just about ready to move on from Dave and its complexities and difficulties.
That sounds good to me. Fortunately, I have another interview for you.
Excellent.
We are returning to Dr. Jason Mittell, a professor at Middlebury College. This week we are going to discuss Lostpedia in all its wonders.
And I defend my description of him as a lost scholar, so let's listen in.
Yeah. So on the notion of forensic fandom, in Complex TV, you spend a long time discussing Lostpedia itself, which I think is pretty interesting because I actually reference Lostpedia all the time, just in the creation of this show. And it's been 14 years since the premiere of Lost. But this is interesting to me because it feels like, it was a very concrete way for all of us to get involved in creating like a tangible product that went alongside the show. That wasn't just the forums, right? But it was something for sort of public consumption.
I think what's distinct about Lost is this was a moment where wikis were still novel.
Yeah.
This sense of, there was a lot of skepticism about, well, Wikipedia, anyone could edit it, so is it true?
Right,
and
you can't trust it, and yeah.
And the idea that fans could come together and create a resource whose impulse was to document a fictional world and its larger storytelling context, right? Because it wasn't about like trying to create the document of everything that happens within the Lost story universe. It was also about creating a resource that would tell us about the actors and the producers.
And also like silly camera mistakes. Like her shoes are wet in this shot and then they're not wet in the next shot and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So this idea of anything that's related to Lost, whether it's within the story, outside the story, fan creations, all of this was fair game for what Lostpedia was going to document. And it was really a very vibrant thing. I mean, I was very active with Lostpedia for about a year. I was actually one of the sysadmins for a brief period. So I got a hand of in terms of how Lostpedia works and the culture around it. Really saw that their participation in Lostpedia was one of the primary reasons why they liked the show, right? So this idea that they could engage in a community where the impulse was to document everything and make sense of everything was really appealing to a lot of viewers. And if you think about it, this is interesting. I mean, certainly this is an impulse that a lot of people have to master some domain of knowledge, right? So whether you're a sort of Civil War buff or you collect antiques or you're a music fan and want to know everything that, your favorite band has been involved with and whatnot, this sort of impulse to document and master a domain of knowledge is pretty widespread.
Right.
So what Lost did was created a show in which we saw rolling out week by week. Then we had this platform of Lostpedia that made it very, very easy for hundreds of people to actively participate in that documentation and then debate, well, what belongs here and what doesn't belong here. I saw this in this shot, but how do we make sense of it? How do we label something like that changes or these continuity errors or the things that are maybe just theories, a way of interpreting it, but it seems like we have to deal with it, or like trying to chat. Like it was really interesting in season 6 where you have the flash sideways. Lostpedia didn't have a way of talking about that. Like how do we what verb tense do you use to talk to these two relationships? This was a challenge to making sense of this narrative, and for a lot of people that was really fun. And then the other thing that Lostpedia was really invested in was bringing together all of the various paratexts, the larger context, the extensions, the things like the novel Bad Twin, or the alternate reality games like the Lost Experience, or all these things that were happening outside of the TV show. Lostpedia was trying to bring it all together and say, all right, so you don't have to participate in these alternate reality games, but here's what we learned from this. Here's the narrative information that's useful for TV viewers. Right,
to really be a comprehensive record of this world.
Yep.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things now, I think that's really fascinating, and this is why I'm interested in this podcast is I don't know, do you have policies? I mean, in terms of, is the expectation that this podcast is for someone to rewatch Lost or to watch for the first time?
I mean, we're not gonna stray away from spoiling the ending for you. My assumption is that everybody listening has watched Lost, even though it's possible they haven't watched it in 10 years.
Yep. Right.
But yeah, I'm assuming everybody has. But for me and Sammy, I think we've watched it on occasion in the last 10 years, like just watched a few episodes on Netflix here and there. But to rewatch the whole series, it is this experience of rediscovery, like, oh, I forgot that that's how that relationship started, or that, we just watched the first episode of season 2. And there's this scene where Shannon runs out into the jungle in the dark after the dog, and it looks exactly like the scene where she gets killed a few episodes later. And, you see all these things that you didn't see.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because, for me, one of the fascinating things about Lostpedia was it was something I experienced in real time in the original run.
Yeah.
So I remember how a page may have looked when a character was first introduced, right? So you think about, so in season 2, we meet Desmond.
Right.
Well, like Desmond's page on Lostpedia in, episode 3 of season 2 is a vastly different thing than what it is today.
Right.
And then but then you think about the way that we used Lostpedia at the time was as a way to jog our memories.
Yeah.
So, like, oh wait, this reminds me of something that I saw in season 1, but I haven't watched it in 2 years. What's going on there? Well, you can't do that now. So someone who's watching Lost for the first time, Lostpedia is not a valuable resource because it's comprehensive about everything. Right. But when we were watching it as it first aired, it was really useful because it was the place that you knew that it was up to date with whatever has already been aired, but not forward from that, right? It's not the same as going into the writer's room and seeing their Bible of what's going to happen, right? So, but now Lostpedia is not really that. It's not a participatory research for people who are a resource for people who are watching for the first time.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way that it really changes. I would love to figure out a way to kind of navigate Lostpedia as if you're watching the show for the first time and like you come to episode 3 of season 2, you can go to Lostpedia and tell it, this is when I am in the show, and it will only tell you what they knew at the time.
I wonder if the Internet Archive has indexed any of that, or I've never looked.
The problem with the internet, you can get individual pages on the Internet Archive. You can't get the entire site interlinked, right?
Yeah.
So
that would be difficult, but
right.
Yeah.
No, it would be a pretty complex coding thing, and I don't do that. But I would love for someone to be able to do that, because this is one of the things I find fascinating, both as a fan and as a scholar, is the idea that when we're looking at serial narrative, our consumption is rooted in time in a way that is ephemeral. I remember really distinctly, reading Harry Potter book 6.
Yeah.
And, it ends on a pretty, magnificent cliffhanger. And, we had, 2.5 years or so
some amount of years, yeah,
freak out about it, and trying to make sense of that.
Well, and I mean, this is on a much shorter timeline, but at the end of Lost season 5, that's a remarkable cliffhanger.
Boom.
Yeah. And you just come out thinking, did they reset? Did they what? How in the world is season 6 going to start?
And today, if you're watching for the first time, you say, "Whoa, I can't wait to see that," and you literally don't wait to see that. Put in the next DVD or hit the next episode on Netflix.
Yeah.
So I think Lostpedia, I mean, for me, that was a big part of what Lost was a place to participate, to create a community, because the people would sort of back channel talk about things, and to have a sense that this is something that we are doing beyond just watching.
Right. And something I wonder about in my experience of television today is entirely streaming. I don't have a cable subscription.
Okay.
And I have social media. Like if I'm going to connect with somebody on the internet, it's going to be on one of these social platforms. And I am constantly connecting with people on the internet, right? We all are. But I don't know that, I mean, there's Reddit, which is maybe the closest thing we have to a forum kind of community. But I'm just, when I think about if Lost started today, could Lostpedia emerge? Or what would it be if it were to emerge? And I don't have a good answer to the question, but it's...
I think it would be if Lost were started today and aired the same way, weekly installments. I think Lostpedia would be fairly the same. There are still fan wikis, right? Sure. And if you go into Westworld wikis and sort of follow the week by week development, they're doing the same thing that Lostpedia did.
Right.
I think the difference is what is it for Stranger Things? There's no gap between episode 5 and episode 6 of Stranger Things for people to stop and ask themselves what happened, right? Because if you're watching Stranger Things, it's really difficult to find a community of people who are synced up with you.
Right.
unless they're sitting on your couch, right? So you can pause and talk face to face. But if I go on, if I'm watching Stranger Things, even the week that it's released, and I go on Twitter and say, man, I just watched episode 5. I can't believe this happened. Odds are people will say, well, in episode 7, you'll understand why that happened, right? And that's not what you want.
That's no fun,
right?
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that sense of, what I love about seriality
Yeah.
and the way that these gaps structure our experience is the sense of simultaneity. We all sort of share knowledge of what's going on.
Right.
This was, I had the pleasure once of interviewing Damon and Carlton and for my book and sort of making getting their perspective on various things. And it just so happens that the day that I interviewed them was the day that they finalized the script for the finale. It was during season.
Oh my goodness!
Right? So it was really weird to be sitting in their office, talking with them. And I had seen at that point probably 5 or 6 episodes of season 6 at that point, and they had just finished writing the final episode. And
did you know this at the time? So you know that they know.
Yeah. So they told me that. They said, wow, you came at a great day. We just finalized the script at the end. I'm like, wow. And obviously I didn't want to be spoiled. There are people actually who really like spoilers. And I actually authored, a colleague and I wrote an article where we studied Lost spoiler fans at the time. People who sought out spoilers before the episodes aired. Because they did circulate. And that's a whole other fascinating thing. But here I am sitting with the creators. They know how the whole thing ends.
Right.
I'm hugely invested in how the whole thing ends. But of course, I want to experience it, right? I don't want to be spoiled. I don't want to be told, well, this is going to happen.
Right.
Was this sense, and they were pros because, of course, they do this all the time, of being able to sort of self-monitor their own disclosures and be able to say, we were talking about various things, and they would say, well, you don't know the answer to this yet. They would say, to very clearly say, like, we're not going to tell you what this is, but we're going to discuss it as something that we're trying to make sense of.
Yeah. Wow. I guess just one kind of broad question to close. I'm curious about how you mentioned a difference between sort of scholars and critics.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are fans sprinkled among both. These aren't mutually exclusive categories, right? But how is Lost sort of perceived among scholars? How does that differ from how it's remembered by critics? And how does that differ from this relationship that all of us still have to the show?
I think that there's a skepticism amongst some TV scholars at Lost and shows like Lost, in that there was a sense that they were trying to sort of be, what we might consider better than television, right? Aim for something that was distinct from traditional television. And, so I think that that's one vein that some TV scholars have. Certainly, like with the fandom as a whole, there are a lot of scholars who enjoyed Lost and then didn't like the ending, and then sort of there was that backlash against it.
And that colors your understanding of the rest.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not in that camp. I'm actually a fan of the ending and happy to defend it. But there's a sense, I think, that those fashions play out. I think that there's certainly a recognition that what Lost did was really important in terms of some of the ways in which it broke new ground for the way the industry worked with the setting the end date and shorter seasons, for the way in which fans could engage and participate in a mainstream successful show in a very overt way and diverse way. There were a lot of different fandoms, and that I think one thing that people don't talk much about, but I think is really important, is the way that the show embraced a sort of global character base. I think that at the time, the idea that you could have episodes where the majority of the dialogue was subtitled, in the case where the
Jin and Sun plot lines, that
was pretty atypical at the time, and I remember was somewhat controversial, and I think that's what part of its legacy, the fact that you had a fairly multicultural global cast and had diversity of language, was I think quite important in that way. I think the other thing is that I think a lot of people look at Lost and say, like, that was a fun show. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't at the level of what a lot of sort of shows in the 2000s that embraced some of these elements of complex TV, but did it in more, I don't want to use the word highbrow necessarily, but socially legitimate ways. I mean, a show like The Wire, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Mad Men. I think that those, more recently, The Americans, I think those shows are regarded as more sort of like, if you're going to say that TV can be art, they're
a little more like serious.
Yeah.
Somehow. Okay.
And I think a lot of it is just because Lost, first and foremost, was a genre show. Right. Something like The Wire, which I adore. I'm not knocking The Wire. It has the advantage of the fact that it's all about trying to be realistic, trying to portray the world as it is. No time travel. There's and the aesthetics of The Wire are very, very different because of that. So I think that's part of, so Lost, I think, is remembered as a really compelling and successful, innovative genre show. Much, very similar to Battlestar Galactica. I think that's another show of its era that is comparable.
Right. Which I think a lot of us love just as much or in the same way. Yeah. I certainly do. We can have a more lengthy conversation about this another time, but what is your brief defense of the finale?
So I stand by the finale because I think that a lot of people totally misunderstood what, that no, they weren't all dead all the time. That's not what is being told to us, number one. Number two, I think what the finale did was it leaned into its characters and it said, we're going to reward the viewers who have invested in these characters by paying off these character arcs. And there were moments in it that really paid that off, and that I found very compelling. And that's what the show was about to me, ultimately. Yeah, I loved the games, I loved the mysteries and things like that. But in the end, there were just characters who I loved, and I loved spending time with these characters and sort of seeing their engagement, their conflicts. So the fact that the series paid that off, and that's what it delivered, completely satisfied me.
I think the point he articulates about how it's impossible to recreate what you had in the moment, where Lostpedia was this living, breathing resource that did not look ahead and did not give anything away, and could be used by everyone simultaneously to figure out what was going on in a way that you just can't do anymore. I just think that's such an important point, especially now, like you said, where you have streaming television. Lostpedia was such a product of not only Lost, but just that particular moment in television time. And it feels like...
Right, when we had the internet, we had a robust online forum kind of community, but we didn't have streaming yet. Like you said, like if you're watching Stranger Things, you just press next. You don't stop and wait and wonder about what's going to happen because you can find out immediately.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been watching right now a series of unfortunate events on Netflix, which just came out a couple of days ago. And that's also a story where there's like a lot of mythology and sort of unanswered questions and mystery. And one of the interesting things they've been doing in the TV show is like sort of adding to the answers and resolutions that were given in the books. But I'm watching it and I get to the end of an episode and it's like, oh, I really want to go online and like see what people are saying about this cool thing that was revealed. But then it's like, shit, I haven't watched the last couple yet, so I can't do that because I'm going to get spoiled for what comes next. So I've got to wait until it's totally over. And then there will be a brief moment where I can go online and see the reaction. But then that was like, a week of everyone's lives, and then we're moving on to something else as well. Whereas when Lost was airing, it was like, you had 6 months of the year spent, analyzing and thinking it through. And then you could do these cool off-season reality games to bridge the gaps.
Yeah.
Whereas now you get that, like brief, brilliant moment where you watch the whole thing, talk about it with people, and then you move on.
Right. Because there's so many other things to watch, or there's... I don't know. Yeah, it feels like we don't do that anymore.
We don't.
Well,
We were lucky to have Lost.
yeah.
We were lucky to have Lost. Anyway, we'll be back next week. As mentioned, we've got SOS, which is the first and only Rose and Bernard-centric episode of this show, so that will be a real treat.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was the only.
It is the only.
Oh. Okay, well, I look forward to it. I love Rose and Bernard.
Please, if you don't already, follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast, Twitter also at thehatchpodcast.
If you like the show and you feel so inclined, you can always rate and review us on your podcast app of choice. That helps other people find the show, which is a great help. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we'll see you all next week.
Namaste.